Hello everyone, my name's Luke Parker. I'm a specialty solutions architect at Amazon Web Services, and I specialize in running Microsoft workloads on AWS. But today we're here to talk about using Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On to integrate with Azure Active Directory. So what do we have on the agenda today? So first of all, we'll be looking at a quick service overview of AWS SSO and doing that level 100 overview. We're going to be looking and focusing at bringing your own identity provider or IDP to AWS SSO. In this case, we'll be looking at Azure Active Directory. We'll be looking at configuring that in live and showing you how to do that through the Azure portal and also in the AWS console. And finally, we'll be going through a review of what we've done and a quick recap. So let's jump straight into it. With Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On, you get a central permissions management tool that allows you to assign roles to users and groups, all sourced from your chosen identity source. And one of the great things that I love about Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On is that it integrates natively with AWS organizations. So for example, if you have hundreds of accounts across your entire organization and you need that single pane of glass to be able to manage permissions for those users and apply those roles to different accounts, you can do that all within the console. And it allows you to bring your existing corporate credentials to AWS and have one logon for using and accessing the AWS console, and even provisioning out access to Salesforce, Box, and Office 365. And one of the great things about this is that it coexists with IAM, Identity and Access Management. So there's no conflict or having to choose between the two different methods of managing your access to AWS. It also integrates with the command line interface. So when using AWS CLI v2, you get direct integration with AWS SSO. So there's no more copying and pasting of your security credentials. And as is the focus for this talk today, we're going to be looking at how you can actually bring your existing identity provider and how you can leverage your investments that you've already made in those identity providers today and bring them to Amazon Web Services. And not to forget to mention that you have first-party application integration as well. So we've got some great stories around using AWS SSO to provision access to your users to Amazon SageMaker notebooks or AWS IoT Sitewise Monitor. As you can see from this slide, we have many different options to suit your identity needs, whether it's integrating with traditional Microsoft Active Directory or an external identity provider such as Okta Universal Directory or Azure Active Directory, or even managing your users and groups in native AWS SSO. We have the facility to meet your requirements. And of course, AWS SSO is a security assertion markup language, or SAML 2.0 service provider. And with that, we actually support the inbound provisioning of users and groups from your chosen identity store. So of course, you can manage your users and groups from your identity store of choice. So without further ado, let's get on to the AWS SSO demo, where I'll be showing you how to integrate with Azure Active Directory and configure that with AWS Single Sign-On. Okay, so as you can see, we have the AWS Management Console in the left-hand tab, and in the right-hand tab, we have my Microsoft Azure console. So let's get started in AWS SSO and click into the service here. So step 1, choose your identity source. And you can see here in the identity source section, it's currently configured to AWS SSO as the source for users and groups. So we want to change that. And as per our slides before, we have 3 options. So as you know, we're looking at Azure Active Directory. So we'll be needing to select the External Identity Provider button here. And if we scroll down, what we need to take note of is we have 2 important sections here, the Service Provider Metadata and the Identity Provider Metadata. So first of all, let's download the AWS SSO SAML metadata. This is what will be used to create the federation between the AWS SSO service and Azure AD Enterprise application for AWS SSO. So let's download that. And on the other side, on the Azure Active Directory side, this is where we'll upload the SAML federation metadata file in this section here. So let's go across to Azure Active Directory. So we're starting off in the Azure AD Directory page here, and you can see mine's called Azure Dev Directory. What I'm going to do is follow the Enterprise Applications link, and in here I'm going to press New Application, and we're going to be looking for a non-gallery application here so we can fill out the SAML federation metadata manually. I just put in a name here, AWS SSO for example, and press Add. And that's already created for us. And first of all, let's go down to Single Sign-On. And here we want to select SAML. And you can now see that we're in the configuration page for uploading the federation metadata file here. So if we click on Upload Metadata File and select Browse, and in my downloads, I have the file here downloaded today, just a moment ago. Press Open on that and Add. You can see that fills out our needed information there, entity ID and the assertion consumer service URL. So let's save that off. Take a few seconds for that to complete. And can you see that's completed successfully? So close that down now once it's done. And we're not going to test that straight away because there's another couple of steps that we need to look at first. So let's say no, I'll test that later. And of course, we need to grab the federation metadata XML from this side and take it back over to AWS SSO. So you can see here in stage 3, we get to download that file there. And you can see that's downloaded, awssso.xml. So let's go back to the SSO service page and hit the Browse button. So we have the AWS SSO metadata file there. So now we want to be able to upload that. So we click Open. Next on Review. And type Accept here. And make sure that you read the conditions of changing your identity source before you complete this, if you've already configured this before. So change identity source, and that's that step complete. So you can see we've got an external identity provider configured here, where this was AWS SSO before. And as well, we've got our authentication set to SAML 2.0 and provisioning set to manual. Now, of course, we, in most circumstances, would like to do our provisioning automatically. So for example, where we make a change to a user or group in Azure AD, we would want that to automatically propagate through to AWS SSO. So let's walk through that step. So by clicking on Enable Automatic Provisioning, we have the SCIM endpoint here, and we have the access token. So bear in mind that this will only be shown once. That's the access token. So make sure you take note of this. So we're going to copy these values and use them over in the Azure AD console. So I've taken the SCIM provisioning URL there. So I'm going to hit provisioning here. And getting started. Set the provisioning mode from manual to automatic. Paste in the tenant URL there. Back to AWS SSO. Grab the access token and paste it into the secret token portion here. So test connection, let's see whether that works. So yes, the endpoint access has been verified and the credentials are authorized to enable provisioning. So let's close that down. And depending on your application and use case, you may want to change the user attribute mappings, but for the purposes of this demo, we don't need to. So let's save this. And that's automatically saved there and successfully saved. So let's go back a step. And now back over to AWS SSO. Let's close this down. Go through to users. And you can see at the moment, we have no users or groups in AWS SSO. So let's go back to AWS SSO Enterprise App in Azure AD and hit Start Provisioning. That's starting the cycle at the moment. If you have any issues in this test in your environment, you can go to Provisioning Details and Technical Information to verify the provisioning interval and when a steady state has been achieved. Also, you can check out provisioning logs as well to look at the audit details there. But we're going to wait a minute just for that to complete. So after about 30 seconds, you can see that the initial cycle has completed. And if we go to provisioning details, you can see that we have a steady state achieved there. And the provisioning interval was every 40 minutes. Okay, so one of the important steps that we need to consider is that when you create an enterprise application, you need to assign users to that enterprise application. So let's go to users and groups, add user, select a user here. Let's do AWS SSO demo and assign. And now you can see that user is assigned to AWS SSO Enterprise Application. So after a moment of waiting there, let's go back to the AWS SSO console and into users. And you can see the user that we assigned to the enterprise application in Azure AD, AWS SSO demo has been assigned and brought over via SCIM or SCIM automatically from Azure AD. So let's click on that and prove that. So you can see that was brought in 16 minutes ago via SCIM. Now, what can we do with this user? So let's go to AWS accounts and you can see my test account here. What I can do is tick this box and say assign users. And you can see my one user here. In your environment, you're going to have multiple groups where you can assign groups to accounts, which is obviously the best practice over assigning individual users. But for this demo, let's go ahead and do that. So next, permission sets. So permission sets, this is where you would define what level of access a user and group would have to an AWS account. And you can see I've got a couple of permission sets already defined here. But let's make a new one. And you can see that these are directly integrated into AWS policies. So for example, we have an existing policy that we could attach here. It could be network administrator, for example. And you can see that permission set has been created. And if I tick that and go to finish, you can see that that user has now been assigned to that account for the network administrator role. So if I go back and to the permission sets, you can see network administrator there has been provisioned. So let's look at what the login workflow looks like for this new user. Pause. Let's open up the user portal URL in an incognito window. And what you'll notice, if you keep an eye on the URL at the top, is that we go to login.microsoftonline.com. That's our external identity provider that we've configured. So let's copy and paste in our username, enter the password of the user assigned to this enterprise application. We won't stay signed in. And as you can see, we've been presented with the AWS SSO sign-in page. And if I click on AWS account, you can see that the name of the account we assigned to this user earlier. And if we can click under that, you'll see the permissions that have been assigned via the permission sets here. So network administrator. And if I click on the management console, we'll assume that role and be directed to the AWS management console. And you can see our federated login there for the network administrator role. Now, just to show the permission sets at work, if I click on EC2 and try and launch an instance, select an AMI here, you can see that we don't have the permissions to perform that action, showing those permission sets at work there. That concludes the demo. So what have we seen? Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On has allowed us to bring our users and groups from Azure Active Directory, and we did so in under 10 minutes with no additional infrastructure required. And oh, by the way, Amazon Web Services Single Sign-On is a free service. There's no charge to you as a user to bring this to your organization. And in the demo, I hope that you've understood now how easy it is to set up this SAML Federation Trust between AWS SSO and Azure AD. You've seen the administrative workflow where we set permissions to our users and assigned accounts to users as well. And you've also seen the end user experience too, where we logged in as the network administrator and did our job and role there. And I'd like to thank you for your time in watching this video today. Now it's your turn. Let us know how you get on. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me today.